Think of the most critical security asset in your entire organization. Just, imagine the ultimate bouncer standing at the door of your network.
Right, the one with the only guest list that actually matters.
Exactly. This central authority decides who gets into the building, who gets blocked, and who gets granted access to the most sensitive vaults inside.
Yeah, the VIP areas.
Right. Now, imagine a vulnerability that allows just an anonymous person walking off the street to completely bypass that bouncer.
Oh.
They just add their own name to the top of the VIP list as the owner of the building and, walk away with total control.
It's terrifying, but it happens.
It does. So, okay, let's unpack this. Welcome to this special VulShield Threat Intel briefing on the deep dive. I'm glad you're joining us for this because we're pulling from a highly specific stack of intelligence today.
Yeah, we have some really critical sources to go through.
We do. We're looking at an official May 12, 2026 Microsoft Security Update Guide, a really comprehensive historical overview of the 2017 WannaCry attack, some threat intel from CrowdStrike on the 2020 Zerologon vulnerability, and a recent security analysis piece called The Master Key.
That last one is a really great read, by the way.
It really is, and our mission today for this briefing is to analyze a newly discovered, highly critical vulnerability. It's CVE 2026-418889.
Right.
But more importantly, we really need to dissect the underlying behavioral pattern here, the pattern that makes this exact type of technical flaw a recurring global nightmare.
Yeah, because the technical mechanics of this specific bug are fascinating, but they represent, only half of the equation.
Right.
The more dangerous element is really the timeline of how organizations react to these disclosures. When we look at the anatomy of massive cyber crises over the last decade, we see an identical sequence of events playing out on a loop.
Just over and over again.
Exactly, catching enterprise networks entirely off guard every single time.
So to understand the sheer scale of this new 2026 threat, you really have to look at the target itself. The sources describe it using this skeleton key analogy.
That's a good way to put it.
Yeah, think of a single key that opens literally every door in your company. It opens the filing cabinets, the front gates, the executive offices.
Even the secure room where the keys to all the other facilities are kept?
Exactly. In a Windows enterprise environment, that skeleton key is your domain controller, or DC. If an attacker compromises your domain controller, they don't have to, spend weeks picking locks or stealing individual badges.
Or quietly moving laterally from laptop to laptop. They don't need to do any of that.
Right. They just instruct the network to open the doors.
Because the domain controller is, well, it's the absolute core of enterprise trust. Computers operating within a Windows network, they don't verify identities independently.
They just trust the DC.
Exactly. They rely entirely on the central authority of the DC running Microsoft's Active Directory. And, this centralized trust model is highly efficient for IT administration, but it creates a singular catastrophic point of failure.
A huge single point of failure.
Yeah. Attackers rarely focus their ultimate efforts on compromising just an individual employee's workstation.
Right, that's just a stepping stone.
Exactly. The end goal is almost always the domain controller, because owning the DC means owning the entire corporate identity structure.
Which brings us to the May 12, 2026 Microsoft security patch for this new flaw, CVE 2026-4109. This vulnerability resides within the Windows Netlogon component.
Yeah. Right.
And for context for those listening, Netlog is the specific cryptographic protocol that the domain controller uses to verify machine identities. It maintains a secure channel with other computers on the domain.
And this flaw, it was assigned a CVSS severity score of 9.8 out of 10.
Which is massive.
It is. Fundamentally, the vulnerability is a stack-based buffer overflow. So when the Netlogon component allocates a specific block of memory, a buffer to process incoming data, it expects that data to be a certain size, right?
Right, like a container that only holds so much.
Exactly. But an attacker can send a specially crafted, oversized network message that just overflows that allocated space. The excess data spills over into adjacent memory spaces that actually control the program's execution flow.
Wow. So they overwrite the instructions.
Yes. By carefully crafting that spilled data, the attacker overwrites the system's instructions with their own malicious code. And the truly terrifying aspect of this specific overflow is that it requires absolutely zero interaction from a user.
None at all.
None. Nobody has to fall for a sophisticated phishing lure. No one needs to click a malicious link or download a corrupt file. Furthermore, the attacker doesn't even need valid credentials.
That's wild. They just send a message.
They just send the crafted network message, the domain controller mishandles the memory allocation, and the DC immediately grants the attacker system-level control.
System level.
Yeah, which is the highest possible level of administrative ownership on a Windows machine. I mean, it is total, unauthenticated, remote code execution.
Okay, but let me challenge that severity score for a moment.
Sure, good.
We all acknowledge that a domain controller compromise is a fundamentally disastrous event. Nobody's arguing that.
Definitely.
But we see privilege escalation bugs or remote execution flaws pop up regularly in enterprise software. I mean, it happens all the time. So why does this specific Netlogon buffer overflow jump to a near-perfect 9.8 and trigger, emergency security bulletins across the globe?
That's a fair question.
What sets this apart from the thousands of other critical vulnerabilities disclosed every single year?
Well, that is really the pivotal question when analyzing threat intelligence. The distinction between a standard critical vulnerability and a literal global crisis comes down to one specific capability. It's wormable.
The crypto worm. So it's not just an attacker executing a manual hack.
Exactly. What's fascinating here is most cyber attacks rely on a human hand on the wheel. An attacker actively picks a target, they find an entry point, establish a foothold.
They run discovery tools to map the network.
Right, and then they manually move laterally. But a wormable exploit operates on a completely different paradigm. Our sources describe it perfectly, actually. They say a worm spreads like a cold in a kindergarten.
That is a very vivid, terrifying analogy.
It really is. Once a single machine on a network is infected, that machine automatically scans its environment and reaches out to infect the next vulnerable machine it can communicate with,
Just totally automatically.
operating around the clock with zero human intervention. It replicates and spreads at machine speed. It drastically outpaces the ability of a human security team to manually isolate infected systems.
So when you take that automated self-replicating capability, right, and you pair it with a flaw that instantly grants ownership of the domain controller.
The physics of the attack completely change.
Yeah. You are no longer dealing with a single compromised web server. You face a scenario where every single machine that the domain controller vouches for is systematically compromised before the security operations center even finishes reading the initial alert.
Exactly. The alerts are firing, but the network is already gone.
And as extreme as that sounds, this isn't a theoretical exercise. It's not a Hollywood movie script. We have witnessed this exact disaster unfold on the global stage multiple times.
We really have. We cannot evaluate the severity of the 2026 Netlogon bug without looking at the historical precedent. We have to examine the first time a wormable Windows flaw shattered global infrastructure.
Right. We have to look at the ghost of 2017, WannaCry.
Yeah, WannaCry.
This remains a defining moment in modern cybersecurity. In May 2017, the WannaCry ransomware attack targeted a completely different Windows protocol called SMB, which handles file sharing.
Not Netlogon.
Right. And the attack utilized an exploit known as Eternal Blue. Eternal Blue was originally developed by the United States National Security Agency before being stolen and publicly leaked by a threat group known as the Shadow Brokers.
And the mechanics of WannaCry were devastatingly simple. I mean, it functioned as a crypto worm. Instead of merely encrypting the hard drive of the machine it initially landed on and demanding a Bitcoin ransom, the malware was programmed to immediately scan
Spamming everything.
everything, both the internal local area network and the wider public internet for any other machines exposing vulnerable SMB ports. It weaponized that Eternal Blue exploit to break into those machines, encrypt them, and use them as new launching pads for further scanning.
It's just exponential growth. And the impact statistics detailed in the sources are absolutely staggering. Over 300,000 computers across 150 countries were infected in a matter of days.
Just days.
The United Kingdom's National Health Service, the NHS, experienced catastrophic failures. They were forced to physically turn away patients and divert ambulances from emergency rooms.
Because up to 70,000 devices across their network were suddenly locked.
Yeah, we are talking about everything from MRI scanners to blood storage refrigerators going offline simultaneously.
That's terrifying. It's life or death at that point.
It is. The NHS alone suffered an estimated £92 million in damages, and total global economic losses were estimated at somewhere between $4 to $8 billion. Massive corporations like Nissan and Renault had to halt automotive production lines because their manufacturing systems are compromised.
Yeah, law enforcement agencies globally categorized it as an attack of unprecedented scale. It highlighted exactly how fragile our interconnected infrastructure becomes when a wormable threat bypasses manual human targeting.
And just spreads wherever the network allows it to go.
Uh,
But here's where it gets really interesting.
oh yeah.
The gut punch fact of the WannaCry disaster isn't the sophisticated nature of the stolen NSA exploit. The true tragedy lies in the timeline.
The timeline is the worst part.
Microsoft had actually released the security patch to fix the SMB vulnerability, specifically MS-17010, in March of 2017.
In March.
That patch was freely available 2 full months before the WannaCry outbreak began its global spread in May. The fix existed. It was tested and deployed by many. But the world suffered billions in damages anyway.
Entirely because thousands of organizations failed to apply the patch in time.
Exactly. Okay, but WannaCry was an SMB flaw. What about Netlogon, the specific component targeted by our 2026 bug?
Right. Netlogon itself has its own deeply troubled history with this exact dynamic. While WannaCry exposed the dangers of unpatched file-sharing protocols, the events of 2020 demonstrated what happens when the core authentication protocol breaks down.
The ghost of 2020. The vulnerability universally known as Zerologon.
Zerologon, officially tracked as CVE 2020-1472. It was a catastrophic flaw in the exact same Netlogon system we're discussing today.
And it scored a perfect 10.0 on the severity scale, right?
A perfect 10.0. The mechanics of the 2020 flaw were almost, well, poetic in their mathematical simplicity. It stemmed from a severely botched implementation of a cryptographic method known as AES-CFB8.
So the developers essentially made a fundamental math error in how they applied the cryptography.
Exactly. In secure cryptography, specifically when using AES-CFB8, you must generate a randomized initialization vector for every piece of plaintext you intend to encrypt.
To keep it random.
Right. This randomness ensures that encrypting the same password twice produces 2 completely different outputs. It prevents attackers from guessing patterns. However, developers made a critical error in a function called compute Netlogon credential.
What did they do?
Instead of generating a random sequence, they hard-coded the initialization vector to a fixed value of 16 0 bytes.
It's all zeros.
All zeros. Because of this static sequence, an attacker could send Netlogon authentication requests filled entirely with zeros. Mathematically, because the initialization vector was also zeros, the attacker had a 1 in 256 chance that the encryption process would output a ciphertext of all zeros.
Wait, so by simply spamming the domain controller with login requests made of zeros, an attacker could force that 1 in 256 probability in a matter of seconds.
Literally seconds.
Once the all-zero ciphertext matched, it bypassed the authentication check entirely. And then the attacker could instruct the domain controller to reset its own Active Directory machine password to an empty string.
Yeah.
You go from being an unauthenticated stranger on the network to holding the master keys to the entire enterprise, simply by leveraging a mathematical certainty.
It completely neutralized the core trust mechanism of the Windows domain. Unsurprisingly, it became one of the most aggressively exploited vulnerabilities of that entire year.
And the recurring theme emerges again here. The threat intelligence explicitly points out that, just like with WannaCry, when the Zerologon attacks reached their peak intensity, the Microsoft patch designed to fix the cryptographic flaw was already widely available.
It was already out there.
So we are currently watching this exact sequence of events unfold for a third time. Let's look at the 2026 reality check.
The parallels are undeniable. With CVE 2026-410889, we are looking at the same target, right? The domain controller.
The same target.
We are looking at the same vulnerable component, Netlogon. It operates on the identical one network message owns everything behavioral pattern. It is zero-click, it is unauthenticated, and it is wormable.
And crucially, Microsoft shipped the patch for this vulnerability on May 12th. Yet the intelligence confirms that within just 2 weeks of that patch being published, Belgium's National Cyber Agency detected active, in-the-wild exploitation.
Within 2 weeks.
We have 3 distinct crises, the same script, the same pre-existing fix, the same disastrous outcome.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, we have to confront the uncomfortable reality that the underlying technology is no longer the core problem. The vulnerability originates in code, sure, but the recurring global disaster is entirely driven by human behavior and flawed organizational processes.
Because patching isn't just pushing a button.
No. Think about the fundamental nature of a security patch. A patch does not provide protection. A patch is merely a recipe for protection. It protects absolutely no one until an IT team takes the time to deploy it across their specific architecture.
Right.
Put yourself in the position of a network defender at a massive enterprise. You're managing thousands of interdependent servers. Patching the most critical infrastructure, like a domain controller, well, it guarantees scheduled downtime.
That's a huge operational headache.
Exactly. It requires drafting proposals, defending them in change approval board meetings, and navigating the pervasive, very real fear that applying a new patch might accidentally break a bespoke legacy system the entire company relies on.
So they wait.
Because of those operational hurdles, patch deployment inevitably slips. A critical update gets delayed for a few weeks or bumped to the next quarterly maintenance window. Defenders operate slowly because, from their perspective, moving fast feels operationally reckless.
But the threat actors are operating in a completely different paradigm. I mean, moving fast is their entire business model.
100%.
The moment a vendor publishes a security fix, sophisticated attackers immediately download that patch and initiate a process called patch stiffing. They compare the old vulnerable binary code to the newly patched binary code to isolate exactly which lines were altered.
It's reverse engineering.
Yes.
Right.
By reverse engineering the fix, the patch itself becomes a highly detailed treasure map. It points the attacker directly to the underlying vulnerability and shows them exactly how the memory overflow or the cryptographic failure functions.
Yeah, see exactly what was broken.
Right. They weaponize that understanding into a functional exploit and race to deploy it against every network that hasn't applied the update.
Sure.
The disaster isn't born from the vulnerability itself.
Yeah.
The disaster breeds in the delta between the speed of the attacker analyzing the patch and the speed of the defender deploying it.
That gap is where the damage happens.
So what does this all mean? If you are a security leader listening to this briefing right now, what is the exact playbook you need to execute immediately?
Well, the threat intelligence dictates a very rigid 5-step directive. The window for debate has already closed. Step 1, patch the domain controllers immediately.
Don't wait for a maintenance window.
You cannot afford to wait for the next scheduled maintenance window or the next change approval meeting. The severity of a wormable, unauthenticated remote code execution flaw on a DC represents the rare, absolute emergency that justifies immediate operational downtime. The domain controllers must be secured first. Everything else is secondary.
Okay, that's step 1. What's step 2?
Step 2, identify your blind spots. You cannot patch infrastructure you have forgotten about.
Oh, right. Shadow IT.
Exactly. In complex networks, the domain controller that ultimately gets compromised is often the old, undocumented test server sitting in a remote branch office that was spun up 5 years ago and never decommissioned.
But it still has access.
The forgotten skeleton key still opens the doors.
Wow. Okay, and step 3 requires ruthless network segmentation, right?
Yes. You have to restrict which machines are physically allowed to communicate with the domain controller. The Netlogon service should never be reachable from guest Wi-Fi networks or remote VPN pools or unrelated VLANs.
You have to limit the blast radius.
Proper network segmentation isolates the threat. It takes a scenario where anyone on the network can send the malicious buffer overflow message and reduces it to a scenario where only highly verified administrative subnets can even reach the service.
That makes total sense. Step 4 is monitoring for the specific fingerprints of the exploit. Security operations teams must configure their logging to watch for sudden spikes in Netlogon errors.
Or unexpected machine account password resets.
Right, or the sudden creation of new domain administrator accounts. These indicators are the telltale signs that an exploit attempt is either currently underway or has already successfully bypassed your perimeter.
And step 5 is the most difficult reality to accept. Have a comprehensive rebuild plan ready.
A rebuild plan.
Yes. If a domain controller is compromised by this level of exploit, you cannot simply run an antivirus scan, evict the attacker, and resume business as usual. You just can't.
Because they already have the keys.
You must operate under the assumption that the attacker has extracted the password hashes for every single user, established persistent backdoors, and created golden tickets. Every single credential in the organization is burned.
You literally have to burn it down and start over.
You have to rebuild the entire Active Directory trust structure from the ground up. It is an incredibly painful, resource-intensive process, but it is mandatory. You must plan for that architectural rebuild before you are forced to execute it blindly in the middle of a live crisis.
The overarching narrative of this Volshield threat intel briefing comes down to this. We have a tendency to imagine cyber catastrophes as these Cinematic, highly sophisticated events, where genius hackers uncover secret, invisible flaws that no one could have predicted.
Like a movie.
Exactly. But the historical loop of WannaCry in 2017, Zerologon in 2020, and now CVE 2026, 4N89 today, proves that the reality is much more mundane and, frankly, much more uncomfortable. The catastrophe is almost never the unknown bug. The catastrophe is the publicly known fix applied too late. A patch is just a recipe, and an unapplied patch protects absolutely no one.
This raises a really critical, provocative question about the future viability of enterprise security models.
What do you mean?
Well, we discussed how attackers manually reverse engineer patches to create treasure maps, right?
Yeah, patch diffing.
But as threat actors increasingly integrate artificial intelligence and highly automated vulnerability analysis tools into their workflows, they can reverse engineer these patches the literal second they are published.
Oh, wow. Instantly. Yeah.
The grace period that human defenders have historically relied on is vanishing. It has shrunk from months during WannaCry down to weeks for Zerologon and is rapidly compressing down to literal hours.
So the humans can't keep up.
If the gap between a patch dropping and an active, wormable exploit launching becomes near instantaneous, can the traditional human-driven change approval board even survive in the future?
That's a great point.
Or are we rapidly approaching a threshold where enterprise networks will have to be handed over entirely to AI, allowing systems to autonomously patch and reboot themselves in real time, risking the very operational crashes that IT teams have spent decades trying to prevent?
It's a huge risk either way. If the bouncer cannot physically check the updated guest list fast enough to stop the threat, you might be forced to hire an automated bouncer, even if that means accidentally kicking out some of your legitimate VIPs in the process.
That's exactly the dilemma.
Well, thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the intel. Take this information back to your teams, review the playbook, evaluate your own network architecture, and please stay patched and stay safe.